What's going on, guys, and welcome to another one-on-one discussion for the Infinite Ammo Syndicate. This time we'll be talking about Phil Spencer's kind of dumb statements about saying people do not care about 60 frames a second. So I'm joined, obviously, myself, Captain Chaos, and co-host, and I'm joined by the other one of the other co-hosts, by Double Dom.
Hey, how's it going? I think this is going to be an interesting discussion because it's not only just on Phil Spencer's statement, but also just on the subject of do people actually or don't actually care about 60 FPS.
Yeah.
I kind of want to dabble into the topic myself on my own channel, but for today's video, we're just going to kind of try to focus on what Phil in particular said. So I'm going to let you kind of take the floor here first.
All right. So basically, Phil was asked, or was in an interview with one of the writers for the WC Tech whatever article here, and they were talking about the Xbox One X and the specs of the One X and 4K, 1080p, basically everything that Phil talked about during E3. And they got into the subject of 60 frames a second, and Phil, the guy interviewing Phil asked, what did he ask? If what his stance, I guess,
On 60
is
FPS,
60 frames
right?
a second. Yeah. And Phil kind of laughs at this, and he's like, "Why do you care about 60 frames?" Which is, quite frankly, a really dumb thing for somebody in his position to say. Being, the kind of the head of Microsoft at the moment, you don't want to say something like that, So he's like, why would people care about that? It's
Right.
and it's
Could I
well, that
just
kind of. I was just gonna say, well, that kind of shows how little you know about what you're actually talking about,
well, could I just interject here really quick
Yeah,
and
sure,
just
go
say
ahead.
that I think from his standpoint, it would have probably been smarter to say that will all depend and vary on the developers developing whatever game that may be.
Right. Yeah.
Well, like they could have said, hey, for us personally, we don't really find the need to develop games at 60 FPS. We want to kind of have more of a push for 4K and 30 FPS, and that would have been fine if they had said that, hey, it will vary from developer to developer. Because if I'm not mistaken, Sony had mentioned that with the PlayStation 4 Pro, that it will vary on the developer and publisher as to whether or not they want to take advantage of the PlayStation 4 Pro and what sort of benefits do they want to add into their game when developing it for the PlayStation 4 Pro.
Yeah. But yeah, this whole interview, Phil more or less kind of, if anything, shows his ignorance on that subject and kind of proves he doesn't really know what he's talking about. I don't know, the fact that he is kind of sort of defending certain games not being in 60 frames is a little bit troubling. I do agree that he should have just basically said, it's up to the developer of the game, putting the game on the console, like what do they want to do with the game, instead of just kind of laughing it off, like, oh, why do you care about 60 frames? It just seems rather odd. I don't know.
I think just really thinking about this as well, like it's really just kind of a shame to hear that, because it's like, at the same time, this is the same guy who said that, hey, if you're gonna invest into the Project Scorpio, Xbox Scorpio, you need a 4K TV, otherwise it's completely useless for you.
Didn't he
And
go
then
back
lo
on
and
that too,
behold,
or is
yeah, they did, because
Yeah.
when they announced it at E3 as what was it, Project Scorpio is the Xbox One X. You don't need a 4K TV to use it. You can get certain performance benefits out of it, and it just kind of it seems like they turned around on that initial statement. So I feel like part of this is going to backfire, and they will turn around because they want to try to get that a lot of the people that criticize Microsoft as to what they're doing with the Xbox to try to get people back on board, or that potential interest in their platform.
Mm-hmm.
And I do agree that it is it can maybe be partial ignorance on Phil's end, because for all we know, he could be just a casual gamer. I mean, we know he games, but he could probably just be a casual gamer, doesn't really concern himself with like performance and frame rate and things of that nature.
I think that Phil is a businessman above all else. Honestly, I don't think he is much of a gamer in general.
Mhm.
That's just what I think, though.
Kind of the vibe you get off him.
Yeah, I could be wrong, but I just get the feeling. Um, and something else that's kind of funny here is that the interviewer says that, uh, well, I don't agree with the interviewer here when he says no one can tell the difference between 4K and 1080p and all that nonsense. I think there is a pretty clear difference. But then Phil goes on to say, you just broke, or well, he says that 60 frames is the only thing that they don't talk about, which I guess is true. I don't remember Phil really mentioning 60 frames too much. He talked more about resolution than anything, and 4K, 4K this, 4K that, everything's 4K. Um,
Yeah.
and Phil's like, you broke your whole argument, and he's like, you just said these games, which I don't know if he said that or not, because it's not in the article that he mentioned anything about this, but you said these games could run on a Commodore 64, or, they would not run at 60 frames per second on a Commodore 64, and I feel like that argument is just, like, I don't know where he got that from, because a Commodore 64 is an ancient computer. It is no
Right.
way comparable to the hardware we have now. And Commodore 64, yeah, of course, I don't think it would be running anything in 60 frames. That is like one of the oldest like consoles or PC like kind of console hybrid, if
It's
anything.
like it's like the fucking Land Before Time
Yeah, like
console right there.
it's such a odd example to bring up, and I don't know where he got that from, because you think if you're trying to argue against that, you wouldn't bring up the Commodore 64. That'd be like
No.
me bringing up the Super Nintendo and like, oh, it didn't run 60 frames, but it's not. It's okay. First of all, it's not running. It doesn't have demanding graphics like today. It's not up to the standards of the games we have now, and it's not running on that hardware. So there is no comparison there.
I would really want to diverge a little bit and kind of get into the frame rate discussion, and just ask, if you had to pick between a game that looks really shitty but is fun to play and runs at 60 FPS or above if you're playing it on say PC, and overall is just a great game to play despite not looking the best, versus a game that visually looks really great, is at a solid 30 FPS but isn't really that fun, kind of has the same sort of trendy kind of gameplay elements that don't really push any boundaries or really just kind of feel like a copy and paste sort of game. Which would you have to pick in that sort of kind of instance?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously the game that runs at a better frame rate, but I feel like if a game runs at least at a stable 30 frames and it looks great and all that, that's fine. I feel like there should like I feel like a lot of these games should kind of go by Neo's example at least, and have the option to run in 60 frames if you want to run it that way, or just have it look really good and run in 30 frames. But that's kind of a new thing. I mean, their consoles just recently have gotten to the point where they are pretty much like, they're the same. They're using similar hardware to computers, and they kind of work the same as computers, as you have to install games on them. They have all these high detail graphics, and we are having games now that do run in 60 frames on consoles. I mean, like, we have had games in the 7th gen that could do that, but now more so than ever, we have more of these games that can run at that frame rate, and games that can run in really high detail on consoles. So now we're having all these upgrade versions of consoles like PS4 Pro, the Xbox One X, that are, more capable of dealing with games that are more demanding, and and they can actually put out games in higher frame rates and resolutions and all that. So I think, I feel like that being the case, we should at least give players the option of what they want. At least if they're on a console, if they want to run a game in 60 frames and have like lower detail visuals, that should be an option. Or if
Right.
they want to run it at high quality visuals and have 30 frames. I mean, really,
I
ideally, it would be high quality visuals and 60 frames. But if you want that, just you should game on PC. But I do
I
like it as an option for a console. If you want
Yeah,
to.
I'm glad you brought up Neo though, by the way, because it's like I think more games really need to like have that sort of like option, even if it's like say because Neo in particular, if you're playing on base PS4, you'd be gaming at like 900p with the action mode, 60 FPS, 1080p 30, or 1080p with a variable frame rate. Whereas on Pro, it's 1080p 60, and then 4K or 1440 30, and that for variable, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and it just like I don't see why we can't have like more of that seen in a lot more releases now. If not that, at least because while I do prefer 60 FPS, I wouldn't say that 30 FPS games shouldn't exist at all.
Yeah.
I do think that if anything, you need to have that frame rate down. It needs to be locked. There shouldn't be any like sort of stutter or frame rate drop. It needs to be locked at 30 if it's going to be at 30. Um,
Yeah.
because
Um,
I know I had recently talked to you about how people are actually defending the poor performance of the Evil Within, or at least the launch performance,
um,
and just you know as far as
yeah,
like
like
as far as
on
poor performance is concerned, like I wouldn't want to not have 60 FPS at that point.
right. Well, like on PC, that the 30 frames a second lock is a stupid option to put in there because on PC people have different hardware configurations and they can run the game at 60 frames. I mean, it should be an option if they want to, if they, that shouldn't even be there really to lock it.
Mm.
It makes sense for consoles, but not so much for computers, people playing it on PC. Um, but yeah, I mean, if you can maintain a stable 30 frames, that's fine. I think that I don't really have a problem with that. And that's coming from somebody who mainly plays games on PC and likes, and prefers playing it in 60. Like, I don't mind if at least on console, because I understand that it has limitations to play it in 30 frames. That's fine. But, yeah, would it be better if we had the option to not play it, to play it in 60? Yeah, it'd be much better. But I just feel like more games should try to do that at least.
Mm. um yeah, and then I guess it just kind of leads into that point of like with PC then too, because there's always going to be those people that'll say, well, who gives a shit about console gaming? Just go to PC. That way you can pick whatever frame rate you want, because you technically can.
Yeah.
You can go even higher than 60 if you wanted
Well,
to, and that's fucking great, by
yeah.
the
I mean,
way.
the main thing about PC
Uh,
is you have the option to do whatever it is you want to do.
yeah,
If you want to upgrade your hardware, you can. You don't have to, but you can. If you want to do,
mhm.
you can pretty much do whatever you want.
I think really though, it really shouldn't have just been Phil just saying like, well, gamers don't really care about 60 FPS, right? Because
Yeah.
I do
Well,
think a lot of gamers care about that sort of thing, but I also
I
think that there are gamers that prefer
yeah.
visual
This is what
fidelity
I
over
don't
frame rate.
like so much about Phil is he kind of seems like he's trying to speak for people, like he's trying to speak for what the gamers want, and it's like he, I feel like that's a mistake. Like he should just what he needs to do is just try to come at it from a neutral perspective and not try to have give out all these opinions that he really doesn't know anything about. He just needs to say, okay, well, whatever, like you said with Sony, like whatever the developers want to do for the game they put on the Xbox One X, like just say that. You don't really need to say anything more than that. But Phil kind of goes into this whole tirade about 60 frames, and it kind of leads people to speculate about things about the console and like, okay, well, what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to prioritize visuals over frame rate, or like what are you trying to say here exactly?
Right.
What does that imply? Um,
Uh, I want to pull up this statement where he says, "Don't get me wrong, I love frame rate. I love Ori. It's one of the reasons why I love playing Forza." And I
I
don't
felt
know
it weird that
why.
he brought up Ori. Like, I
Yeah, he
don't.
went from Ori to Forza. He went from okay. He went from frame rate to Ori to Forza, right? And it's like, and then he ends off on Minecraft, and
Yeah,
it's like,
Minecraft, like one of the most not really visual. Like Minecraft isn't really so much sold on its visuals. I don't think so. I don't know. He just brought up some weird examples because Minecraft is just a pixelized looking game. It's like a sort of old school looking game. So it seems very odd that he brings that up as an example of a game that's like visually striking,
I
which it's
want to
not.
bring up Forza though in particular because if I'm not mistaken, racing games need to be at 60 FPS for pretty smooth animations, and especially with like the speed that you're running at with a lot of these
Yeah.
racing games. So, and I think maybe that's why he brought it up. But like, even then, it's like, okay, so you know that like it will matter for games like that, but I don't see why he would come out and say, well, gamers don't really care about frame rate, because I don't really feel as though that's necessarily true. And it really just kind of goes back down to, well, he probably should have taken a Sony approach with this and said, hey, whatever the developers want to do, if they want to have better frame rate over visuals, they can do that. Or if they want visuals over frame rate, they can do that. We're giving all the options, development options for the developers, so that way they can give any sort of hardware and software benefits, while for people that actually will own the Xbox One X.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I just think it's another example of Microsoft kind of shooting themselves in the foot by certain statements they make, and even before the One X came out, they were talking about all the Xbox is going to have all these exclusive titles, and you remember certain people within the Xbox community were kind of looking at that and saying, oh well, this is going to kill Sony, and then we get to the E3 show and it's all these multi-platform titles, so they either just kind of hype up a lot of stuff or they are not entirely truthful about it. Because while some of the games might be launch exclusives or they might have certain priority, some things that Xbox One X only gets, they're still multi-platform. So that's not
Hmm.
entirely true. One thing I kind of want to, this might be diverging a bit because I kind of want to bring up something I saw in the article, which really kind of caught my eye, is that this, I didn't know about this, but the Xbox One X is apparently, according to somebody that worked on Ark Survival Evolved, the console can be compared to an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1070 with 16 gigs of RAM. For those who know about like PCs, or at least know the basics of PCs and like what hardware PCs use and all that, GTX 1070 is a pretty high-end card, and it is currently a GTX 1070 will put you back like $400 if you were to buy one. Uh, so
I can attest to this because I have a MSI Quicksilver GTX
yeah,
1070 in my, was it
I
1070
this
overclock in
console
my wish
is
list?
worth like $500, and I don't know. I don't believe that it's running that hardware. I think that if it is running that hardware, because like I've said before, consoles run different. It's not the same hardware. It's not like going to be like if you were to get a GTX graphics card for your PC and run it on run that, it would be completely different than if you were to get something that's the console equivalent is basically like an integrated graphics chip. And what that is basically a graphics card that's kind of, or graphics that is being utilized by the processor. So it's like on the motherboard. It's not like an actual graphics card. So those are very, very different in comparison to an actual like graphics card you install on your PC.
The other
And
thing,
that's basically what this console is going to be using. So I don't know. It's really hard to say. either think they're very heavily exaggerating that, or it's just not true. I don't
The
know.
other
The thing
the
that
other thing I wanted
Sorry,
to
I was
I
just
mean,
going to finish up this point.
oh, go
The
ahead.
thing that pisses me off, though, is that we haven't seen what the console is capable of at all. Because if you remember from E3, all we saw was just the showcases of these games were just being played on a PC with quote unquote similar specs. And that
Yeah,
doesn't
which they
that's not
confirmed
going to
that.
be an accurate representation of anything because PCs are going to be much more powerful in general.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I don't like that. And even if I were, especially if I were a fan of Microsoft, and if I was like in the the
Mm.
Xbox fanboy camp, I would be royally pissed because it's like, okay, I don't know how this console is going to
It's
perform.
it's
Like,
not accurate.
yeah.
And I do want to kind of take us back just a little bit on the whole idea of that it's the equivalent of a 1070. I
Mhm.
know we talked a little bit about that in private, and I had said that hey, even if that was the case, theoretically, right, it probably would be the weakest form of variant of the 1070. It'd probably be like what the fucking 4 gig card or 2 gig card.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they make a 2 gig card for the 1070, but you get my point. Is that it wouldn't be like the best possible 1070 that you can get out on the market right now.
No, and I mean, they
I,
also mentioned earlier about the dynamic resolution, where the resolution would change depending on how demanding certain parts of the game are. Like if there's a lot of stuff on screen, or if a lot of stuff is happening, then the resolution will change. So yeah, it's not native 4K, at least for some of the games that showed off, like Assassin's Creed. That would be running into dynamic resolution.
right. So are there any final thoughts before we wrap up? Because I think we're running on our 30
Uh,
minute time.
yeah, I mean, I just think, like, I mean, I don't mind Phil Spencer. I think he's, I'm sure he's an alright guy, but I just think as the president of Microsoft or whatever, he just makes some really dumb decisions sometimes, and sometimes he just can't keep his mouth shut, and other times he cancels projects like Scalebound that don't need to be, he didn't cancel
It's
it,
good
but
for the
he
gamers,
pisses
though.
off people that were working with him because of dumb decisions he's made, like revealing Scalebound before they were ready to reveal it. So I don't know. I feel like from what I've been seeing of Microsoft, they've just been making. It's just been a series of really stupid decisions they've made on their part, and I just feel like as a whole they seem to be really kind of out of touch with what it is people want. And I think that's the main
Right.
problem with them as a company is they just don't seem to realize what it is that the gamers want. And I mean, I'm sure that Phil means well, but judging by the decisions him and his company have made, I'm not so sure. I just don't know. I just feel like they need to really listen, if more than anything, more to what it is people want from them, and actually, just do that instead of, because like I said in my E3 video, I think the main problem with Microsoft is they're too focused on their tech and trying to come out with this like really high end machine, and it just seems to have been taken away any sort of focus they had on like games or putting out games that can only be played on their console.
Right. It's not so much about, hey, we got the games for you guys to play because we know that you've been asking for that. It's more about look at what hardware we have, and look at how much more powerful
Yeah,
it is compared to the competition,
yeah,
and it kind of loses focus.
they're
It kind of reminds me of the days when we had the original PS2, the Xbox, and then the GameCube, right?
yeah,
Technically speaking, the original Xbox was the most powerful piece of hardware, but the
uh-huh.
problem was that most people were gaming on the PS2 because there were more games on there.
I think they've honestly forgotten what it is that during in particular that generation 2 that made each individual console great is that they didn't all try to do this thing that they're doing now, where, well, at least with Microsoft and specifically mostly with Microsoft, is that that Microsoft is constantly trying to one up Sony and try to show off, and that wasn't what it was about. They were all kind of doing their own thing. They all did their own thing, and they were all different. They didn't all have. I couldn't. I could actually tell you the difference between those consoles and what made each one of those unique. With like Xbox and PS4, I can't. At least with PS4, I could tell you, but with Xbox, I don't know. You know, it's like it's the multi-platform system pretty much. The only
You're
game that
right.
would make the system unique is like Halo, and that's really it, honestly, because I don't know what else. Other than that, it's something that's obscure, or it's nothing that anybody would really care about. So
But chaos. Clearly, people are gonna care about State of Decay too,
oh yeah, well,
because
even
Crash
that
is
it's
not
not
relevant,
exclusive.
right?
It's not. Yeah, that's not exclusive.
I'm just throwing some in jokes and some
Yeah.
shade here,
Oh
but
yeah, State of Decay. Yeah, that game
but
looks like a fucking travesty. Like,
yeah. Speaking of frame rate, that fucking game, Jesus fuck, that's a slideshow.
yeah.
But I do agree to an entirety. It is so jarring to see. If you look back just a few, not even
Like even
just two
Nintendo.
generations. Looking
Yeah.
back 2 generations, right?
And I
It
know
is
we rag
so
on
jarring to
Nintendo. I was
see.
gonna say I know we rag on Nintendo, but even Nintendo I could point to and be like, hey, they're doing something that's
Right. At least, even though there is no games that appeal to any of us in the group as far as Nintendo is concerned, or at least a majority of us are concerned.
I mean their gimmicks
There,
identify them.
there,
They
there, there is, there is something on the Nintendo platform that
Yeah.
some stuff you cannot get on Xbox or PlayStation or even on PC. So, it is kind of like, well, at least, if you were gonna, do console gaming and you were doing multiple consoles and you cannot get onto PC, I would just say go for the Pro and go for the Switch. Even though I personally would not recommend the Switch, because I think that the PS4 right now is the best possible console you can have right now. If you were going to go to multiple different platforms, the Xbox just does not have anything really worthwhile aside from backwards compatibility, which technically Microsoft does better than Sony, but it's not really a selling point. I know Reapers has said that in the past too, and I'm starting to agree with that point more and more as time goes on, because if you don't really have the games, what is the point of owning a console?
Yeah, exactly.
And it also kind of boils down to as well, like even how these games perform too. Like, why would I want to get the Xbox version if the PlayStation version just so happens to perform better?
Yep.
So anyway, I think we've had a pretty good discussion on this. I think we've reached our 30-minute time limit. Sorry, I can't speak today. So with that said, you all can find me on Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube as biodevil_dom. Where can we find you, Mr. Captain Chaos?
You can find me on both YouTube and Twitter as Captain Chaos, and you can obviously find me on here too. But I think this was, yeah, like Dom said, this was a good discussion. I do feel like we diverged a little bit, but I feel like it was still a little bit relevant to what we were talking about.
It was bringing up like subtopics that kind of tie into the main topic, because you can tie into how performance has changed over time with some of these consoles,
right,
and even games too.
Yeah, but all in all, I think it was a good discussion. I guess until next time, we will see you guys later.
See ya.